The next step following the pockets on your jacket is to insert the sleeves. That if you read your guide sheet, it says after you've completed your jackets that you will complete any other seams you need to in order to sew your sleeves in. So on one version you will need to put your princess seams on the back of your jacket. On the other version, the back is already in one piece, and so all you need to do is pin your sleeves in. I chose on this jacket to use a Weld Seam Refinement, and so here is my sleeve. When it was originally sewn, I pinned the sleeve to the jacket. It is welted. If you choose a Weld Refinement, you will insert your sleeve and you will pin and you will welt towards the jacket front and you'll welt towards the jacket back. And so you can see there is my Weld Seam Refinement for my sleeve that is ready to go. And so once the sleeves are sewn in, you will have jacket front, sleeve, or jacket back, sleeve, and jacket front heading around. After you have that step, if you look at your guide sheet, the next thing it tells you to do is to pin fit your jacket and then sew your side seam and your sleeve seam in one continuous seam. And so I've already fit this jacket, and so as I pin this together, I would line up my side seam and my sleeve seam, matching places that should match. Your underarm seam allowance should line up, and so find that seam allowance. And I like to begin by pinning the places that are supposed to align when I am through. Okay, match your notches. The bottom of the jacket. Notch on the sleeve. And the wrist area of the sleeve. And then if your jacket has no print or pattern to it that needs to be matched, you would then simply pin between those areas, making sure that you have nice flat surfaces there. My jacket actually has a pattern that I want to be sure aligns, and so I'm going to look back inside there and make sure that where my pattern changes, I match up. And then after you pin, you are ready to sew. Okay, once your side seam and sleeve seam are pinned, then you will go to your sewing machine and you'll start at the bottom of your jacket and you're going to sew up the side seam and continue your sleeve seam. And so you can backstitch because this seam is going to wind up inside either your hem or the band that will go around the waist of the jacket. If you have used a Weld seam allowance, it might be just a little bit bulky there, and you may have to stop and lift your presser foot and get the seam facing the right direction. You want that seam to welt the same direction from the top to the bottom and not get bunched along that seam allowance. So your seam is sewn. Check both sides, check it for tucks. Pull the sleeve out, look at the inside of it. Make sure that your pattern matches. If you've got a pattern, make sure your seam aligns for your sleeve. If you are pleased with that, then you are ready to do the seam refinement that you have chosen. And again, the seam refinement that I'm using on this jacket is a Weld seam, and the side seams are going to welt towards the back, and so I am going to come back now and trim the seam allowance of the back of the jacket And I'm just going to trim that to a slight 1/4 inch. And then welt the seam. And the seam is exactly like, the welt seam that we'll be sewing here is exactly like what we did, showing you the different ways that you could finish the seam. I just want that seam allowance to press flat and lay flat against the jacket as I'm sewing. The only difference is you actually have to go down the side of a sleeve with this as well. And so we are going to pin it on a sleeve board. Okay, so as you're pinning your welt seam, if that's the one you chose, or even a flat seam, you take that and put it on a sleeve board to pin it, it will make it a little bit easier for you in that you won't be risk pinning through your sleeve and onto the back side of it. And so you pin the welt down the sleeve, and then you pin the welt, continue that, heading down the jacket. And again, just pinning that seam allowance to the side is going to help ensure that you wind up with a little bit higher quality seam finish when you're through, that it doesn't tend to walk or push and your welt seam get this barber pull effect as your fabric gets pulled. So when you are pinned, then you are ready to sew the welt seam. And you sew the welt seam in one continuous stitch. You will start again at the bottom of this jacket and sew to the end of the sleeve. In order to do that, we have to pull that sleeve inside out. And so you're just going to reach up, grab the sleeve that's now pinned, and pull that sleeve inside out. So the jacket is laying, base of the jacket, and then the sleeve is a tunnel, if you will, heading up toward you. And that is how we are going to sew it. All right, so we are back at the sewing machine going to sew this welt seam. Just get the needle in position, line the edge of the pressure foot up with the seam allowance, and we're just going to run and stitch up the side, keeping the edge of the presser foot right along that seam, applying just the very slightest bit of pressure as I sew, making sure that that 5/8 inch seam lays flat and is defined as I'm stitching it, so that this top stitching looks straight and is straight when I'm through. Now, this step is really pretty simple up to the point where you hit your sleeve. And as soon as you hit the sleeve, you are now going to start sewing down into your sleeve. And this becomes a process of sew a little bit and then do your best puppy dog imitation, dig a hole down in here, identify your seam, make sure it's laying flat, and then stitch again. And the sleeve itself builds itself up along the presser foot of your sewing machine there. And so you're only able to sew it in a couple of inch increments at a time. And then pull the sleeve out again, get it laying flat. Stitch down. And you can see I've basically stitched to the front. I pull the sleeve again, pull it forward. Make sure that my stitching area is flat and that I haven't got anything caught or stuck in there. And you stitch towards the wrist. And at this time, the entire sleeve is now bunched up here on the sewing machine. And then just reach inside your sleeve, pull that out, and you will have continuously sewn that welt seam refinement along the length of your jacket and the length of your sleeve. That, at this point in time now, you will have jacket front, sleeve, jacket back, sleeve, and jacket front. So it starts to look very much like a fleece jacket.